Rory doesn't know anything, right? All due respects, Rory. He doesn't know anything about LIV. He knows something about the PGA Tour. He sits on the PAC Council. It doesn't have the power that you think because the board has the power, right?
I am James, and this is Golf Relived. He is a fraud. That is what Greg Norman is basically saying about 5 of the biggest names in golf history. And in April 2026, he did not hold back. Norman went after Nick Faldo with everything he had, called him a loner, said they were chalk and cheese, said Faldo said nasty things, said he has zero respect for anything Faldo says about LIV Golf. 30 years after one of the most famous moments in Masters history, the gloves are completely off. If you are enjoying this already, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype. It helps more golf fans find it. So why is Greg Norman going after 5 legends like this? What made him decide to call out the biggest names the sport has ever seen? To understand that, you need to know what is at stake. LIV Golf, backed by Saudi money, launched a war against the PGA Tour. Norman is the face of that war. And his weapon of choice is not just money or competition. It is words. Targeted, personal, and designed to destroy the credibility of anyone standing in his way. He has handed out labels like a judge handing out sentences. Brainwashed, Mouthpiece, Loner, Hypocrite, Gatekeeper, 5 targets. 5 different kinds of fraud. And the order in which we reveal them today is going to take you from the oldest wound all the way to the freshest one. Because this story did not start in a boardroom. It started in a hallway 30 years ago. Let us go there first. Number 5. Davis Love III. Most fans know Davis Love III as one of the classiest players in the game, a Ryder Cup hero, a man who has given decades to the sport as both a player and a captain. He has represented everything professional golf says it stands for: integrity, loyalty, tradition. And Greg Norman absolutely cannot stand what he represents. Love came out publicly and accused Norman of lying to young players. He said Norman made claims about the legal protections LIV Golf would provide to its players and called those claims so untrue. That is a strong word, lying. Norman fired back hard. He said Love never took the time to sit down and figure out what the business model actually was. He said the claims Love made were hollow. He accused Love of defending a system that only benefits people like Love himself. But here is where it gets deep. To understand why Norman targets Love with such personal intensity, you have to go back to 1994. Norman was not just angry then. He was on the verge of something big. He had a plan called the World Golf Tour. 40 of the best players in the world. 8 global events. Massive prize money. Sound familiar? It should. It is basically the blueprint for LIV Golf, built almost 30 years earlier. The momentum was building. Players were talking. And then Arnold Palmer, one of the most beloved figures the sport has ever seen, made a call. He summoned Norman to his office at Bay Hill, and the player Norman had to meet in the hallway before walking into that meeting was Davis Love III. They walked into that room together, and what happened in there ended the World Golf Tour before it ever truly began. Palmer made his case. The PGA Tour was built for everyone, not just the stars. The other players went quiet. The plan collapsed. Norman left that office, believing that players had flipped on him at the last second. He felt betrayed. And in his mind, Love was the face of that betrayal. Not because Love was the loudest voice against him, but because Love was right there at the moment the door closed. Norman has never forgotten it. So when Love speaks out against LIV today, Norman does not just hear a fellow golfer disagreeing with him. He hears a 30-year-old echo of that hallway, that office, that defeat. Love is not just a critic in Norman's view. Love is the gatekeeper, the symbol of a system that crushed Norman's vision once before and is now trying to do it again. Number 4, Jack Nicklaus. If the Davis Love story is the origin wound, then what happened with Jack Nicklaus is the moment the whole body started to bleed. For 40 years, the relationship between Greg Norman and Jack Nicklaus was something golf fans respected deeply. The Golden Bear was the mentor. The Shark was the student who became a rival. It was one of the most celebrated bonds in the history of the sport. Then LIV Golf happened. Norman went to the Washington Post and called Jack Nicklaus a hypocrite. Not in private, not in a conversation between 2 old friends, publicly, in one of the most widely read newspapers in the world. And the reason Norman felt justified doing that was a letter. Norman claimed that Nicklaus had written to him privately, saying that the new circuit was good for the game, and that if it is good for the game of golf, it is good by me. According to Norman, Jack gave a private blessing to LIV before turning around and publicly standing with the PGA Tour. When that contradiction became public, Norman had one word for it: hypocrite. And then he added another phrase that cut even deeper: short memory. Think about what that means when you say it to a man in his 80s who is one of the most respected figures alive. You are either saying he forgot what he wrote, or you are saying he is choosing not to remember it. Neither option is kind. Nicklaus did not come out swinging back. His camp responded by reiterating support for the PGA Tour and wishing Norman well. Polite, measured, final. The door closed. 40 years of friendship and mentorship ended, and Norman was the one who shut it. The message Norman was sending went beyond just Nicklaus. By going after the greatest player in history, he was telling the entire sport that nobody is untouchable. No amount of legacy, no amount of majors, no amount of years. If you stand in the way of LIV Golf, Norman will come for you, even if he once called you a mentor. Number 3, Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods and Greg Norman live on the same island, Jupiter Island, Florida. Two of the most powerful names in the history of golf, separated by a short drive. And according to Norman, they barely spoke for more than a decade. That silence says everything. Norman's label for Tiger is the Mouthpiece. He says Tiger does not know the facts about LIV Golf, that he is being used by PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan to push a message that is not grounded in truth. In Norman's view, Tiger is not speaking for himself. Tiger is speaking for the tour, and the tour is feeding him a version of events that leaves out everything inconvenient. When Tiger publicly called for Norman to be removed from his leadership role at LIV Golf, Norman's response was short and sharp. He said, "Tiger does not decide what LIV does." That is not just a rebuttal. That is a rejection of Tiger's entire status as a moral authority in the sport. Norman was telling the world that the most decorated player of the modern era has no power in this fight. The legal dimension adds another layer. Internal filings from battles between LIV and the PGA Tour suggest Norman believed players like Tiger and Rory were part of a coordinated effort to damage LIV's reputation through public statements. In Norman's framework, Tiger is not just an opponent. Tiger is a tool of the system, speaking loudly while, according to Norman, knowing very little about what he is actually talking about. And the Jupiter Island silence makes that even more striking. These two men could have had a real conversation at almost any point. They lived that close. They never did. Or if they did, it changed nothing. The gap between them became a canyon, and Norman is happy to describe every inch of it. Number 2, Rory McIlroy. If Tiger is the mouthpiece, Rory McIlroy is something different in Norman's view. Rory is the brainwashed one, and that label is meant to sting in a specific way because it suggests that Rory is not even in control of his own opinions, that the PGA Tour's machine got inside his head so completely that he can no longer think for himself. Rory became one of the loudest and most visible voices against LIV Golf. He spoke with passion. He spoke often. He positioned himself as the moral conscience of professional golf, the player willing to say what others would not. And Norman watched all of it with what you can only describe as contempt wrapped in a smirk. Because here is what Norman kept pointing to. Rory McIlroy made his own money move. Early in his career, Rory left the European Tour and shifted his focus to the PGA Tour. Why? Because that is where the bigger events were. That is where the bigger money was. And Norman used that fact like a hammer. He called Rory an independent contractor. He said Rory exercised his right to go where the highest compensation was. And now, Norman argued, Rory wants to shame other players for doing the exact same thing for LIV. The phrase Norman used to frame this was pointed. He said players should not begrudge others for taking what the market offers. He told Rory to sit back and take stock before commenting. That warning carried weight. It suggested that the full story had not come out yet, that the so-called Watergate of golf, as Norman has described it, would eventually expose just how hollow the moral high ground actually is. Norman also said Rory knew nothing about LIV, that his attacks on the league were based on incomplete information, that he was repeating a story someone else wrote for him. When you combine that with the brainwashed label, the picture Norman is painting is of a polished young star who went where the money was, then turned around and built a career as the face of an institution he once benefited from, now using that platform to block others from doing what he himself did. Whether you believe Norman or not, The argument is structured carefully. It is not just personal. It is designed to flip the entire integrity debate, to make Rory look like the hypocrite, to make the tour look like the system pulling the strings, and to make Norman look like the only one being honest about how this sport actually works. Number 1, Nick Faldo. We open where we started, April 2026. 30 years after one of the most gut-wrenching moments in Masters history, Greg Norman reignited his rivalry with Nick Faldo in a way that shook the sport all over again. Nick Faldo is a legend. 6 major championships, a career that redefined what dedication and precision looked like in professional golf. And for most of that career, the defining image connecting Faldo and Norman was the hug on the 72nd hole at Augusta in 1996. Norman had entered the final round with a 6-shot lead. He collapsed. Faldo played the round of his life. And when it was over, they embraced on the 18th green in a moment that the golf world held up as sportsmanship at its finest. Norman now says it meant nothing. He says he knew in that moment that Faldo would go right back to being a loner. He says the words Faldo whispered to him during that hug were hollow. He describes the embrace not as a genuine human moment, but as theater. And he says the two of them were never actually close. Chalk and cheese is how he puts it. Two people who are so completely different that a real relationship was never possible. The 2026 attack was not just about 1996, though. It was about Faldo's work as a television analyst. Faldo had been critical of LIV Golf on air, and Norman said he had zero respect for those opinions because Faldo only ever heard one side of the story. He called Faldo's commentary interestingly stupid. He said Faldo said nasty things. He said Faldo never reached out to get the other perspective. Then Faldo's management did something Norman did not expect. They released the receipts. Text messages from 2020 and 2022. Those messages showed that Faldo had reached out to Norman while Norman was hospitalized with COVID. He checked in. Then later, he invited Norman to appear on a YouTube show, a chance to have an open conversation about the state of golf in front of an audience. Norman turned it down. He cited their lack of a real relationship and their different views. So, in Norman's own words, he declined the invitation to have the other side heard. The very thing he accused Faldo of refusing to seek. That is the twist that makes this feud uglier than any of the others. Because it is not just about old wounds or business rivalries. It is personal. It is petty. And it has been simmering for 3 decades, waiting for the right moment to boil over. The loner label is also doing specific work here. By calling Faldo a loner, Norman is saying Faldo is not built for the team-based, collaborative future that LIV Golf claims to represent. He is framing Faldo as a relic, someone too isolated, too traditional, too stuck in his own world to understand what golf could become. It is not just an insult. It is a declaration that Faldo has no place in the conversation about where the sport goes next. And now look at what Norman has done across all 5. He has called out a gatekeeper who blocked him 30 years ago. He has shattered a mentorship that the sport considered sacred. He has dismissed the most decorated modern player as a puppet. He has branded the sport's most vocal active defender as a brainwashed spokesman. And he has stripped the emotional meaning from one of the most iconic moments in Augusta history. Each label does a specific job: hypocrite, mouthpiece, brainwashed, loner, gatekeeper. Together, they're designed to build a wall around the PGA Tour and make everyone defending it look morally compromised. Norman keeps saying the same thing in different ways. You do not know the facts. You have not seen the full picture.
The Watergate of golf is coming, and when it does, everyone will see who was telling the truth.
Think about how powerful that strategy is. If your critics do not know the facts, you never have to answer their criticism on its merits. If they took money moves themselves, their integrity argument falls apart. If they never reached out for your side of the story, their opinions do not count. Norman has constructed a system where he can never truly lose the argument because he has already disqualified everyone who disagrees with him. That is not debate. That is a fortress built in plain sight. And he built it one label at a time. Whether that reveal ever comes, nobody knows. What is clear is the damage already done. A 40-year friendship with Nicklaus, finished. A neighborly relationship with Tiger, non-existent. A wound with Faldo that a Masters hug could not and did not actually heal. A feud with Rory that turns every golf conversation into a debate about who is the real hypocrite. And a grudge with Davis Love that stretches back to a hallway at Bay Hill in 1994. Norman has spent decades feeling like the establishment stole something from him. A tour he wanted to build. A legacy he felt was unfairly taken away. And now, with resources behind him that Arnold Palmer could never have imagined, he is fighting that old battle again. Only this time, the whole world is watching every move. These are not just golf disagreements. They are the wreckage of relationships. The sport has moved from a place where legends pass the torch to each other with respect to a place where they accuse each other of fraud in newspapers and on social media. The names and the records and the trophies are still there, but the warmth that used to connect the generations of this game has been replaced by something colder. That is what this war has cost. But here's the thing, golf fans are not powerless in this. The people who love this sport still have a voice. They can demand honesty from the leaders on all sides. They can hold every player, every commissioner, and every executive accountable for what they say and what they do. They can refuse to let the grudges of the powerful become the story of the sport forever. Golf is bigger than Greg Norman. It is bigger than the PGA Tour. It is bigger than LIV Golf. The game itself, the fairways and the greens and the rich history etched into every major championship, that belongs to the fans. The players come and go. The politics shift and change. But the love that brought people to this sport in the first place does not have to be a casualty of these wars. And as long as fans keep asking the right questions and speaking up, the sport has a chance to find its way back to something worth believing in. Leave a comment below and tell us which of these 5 you think Norman had the strongest case against. Like this video if you want more golf stories like this one, and subscribe to Golf Relived so you never miss what comes next. If you are enjoying this already, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype. It helps more golf fans find it.